very good morning to you.
Morning, Jane. How are you doing?
Since the restrictions have been lifted, what have you seen?
Well, there's been an overwhelming, pent-up demand that has really been sitting there. And we find it at the bush, we find it at the beaches, rural sites, so any open spaces that actually encouraging social distancing has really been popular. I think when the president announced that we're moving down to stage 2, load shedding 2, lockdown 2 rather, not right?
Kind of feels the same thing sometimes, doesn't it?
The Kruger National Park's website actually crashed. We were inundated with all bookings. So we're seeing a good upsurgence of people wanting to go out and really experience the country.
And you know it's fantastic, especially people who enjoy travelling overseas, that it's, I'm sure, shifted their focus onto what incredible attractions we have here in South Africa, and that will be important to the recovery.
Absolutely. I mean, the recovery is going to be led inside out, really starting with domestic tourism, then regional, then ultimately international. And this phenomenon is actually the same all around the world. It's all about confidence, all about safety. People explore their backyard first before they get confidence to get on a 10-hour flight, as an example.
And that confidence factor, I mean, how have you managed to overcome fears expressed by people, the fact that they might not be safe going to a place, sitting on a plane?
You know, it's amazing the evolution of the pandemic, where we didn't understand it and we thought it was going to come and go, right? I think we've all accepted that COVID is with us for some time. Now, what the sector has done, they came up with health and safety protocols that have been put in place. These are of global standards, and they're all about giving confidence and building trust to the consumer that they are able to travel and consume tourism in a safe manner. But next week, we're also starting a campaign, essentially, to inform and educate the consumer. So when you go to the bush, you know exactly what to expect and also what to demand should not be there.
I mean, I have to fill in about 5 forms, I mean, quite specific. They really are taking it seriously. We have to be tested, apparently, every single day, even though we are in our own setup there in the bush. So they are taking it seriously, and I suppose they have to, because if they get caught out, if there is a case there, they could lose a lot more than they've already lost.
Absolutely. And I think the joke is the moment we all get our temperature taken 20 times a day, and that's just the sign of the times that we're in. The precautions are really there to protect you as a consumer, but also, as well, importantly, the employees as well. So it does not make sense to take shortcuts, because the consequences far outweigh the short-term benefits that could be there. So we really encourage people to say as well, consume tourism, but don't forget, we're still in lockdown level 2, right? And we want to go down in terms of the number of positive cases in the country, and essentially look forward to ultimately opening up international.
And I guess we have to respect more the environment and our country. I think the pandemic has taught us a lot about encroaching onto the environment, possibly being in places that we shouldn't be in. Do you think that is important to recovery, not only for the country, but for wildlife that have taken over places that possibly they weren't in before because of tourists?
Absolutely. So, when we use the term recovery, it is not really meaning we're going back to ways of old.
No.
But it is essentially saying how do we regain the level of performance that we had previously. We have to, reconfigure as to what our relationship will be with the environment. Issues around sustainability become key. Issues around in terms of the new ways of engagement, etc. Because in the 5 months that tourism was not allowed to operate, the animals, you are right, have been encroaching and kind of really moving into open spaces. Now it's finding that equilibrium, and that's going to be guided by the nature conservationists to make sure that both sides are taken care of.
And Caesar, how did you feel, and those in the tourism industry, during the lockdown? It must have been a pretty bleak and depressing period. Thousands of people lost their lives. How did you keep your motivation going?
I still remember the week when the president announced that 26th of March we're going to a hard lockdown, level 5, and that our international borders are shutting. We had to find a way of identifying all the international tourists in the country and actually ask them to leave, because we were shutting down the country. And you can imagine there were far more people than the actual number of flights around. So all that scrambled. So that was the focus point at that time. And then we went through the period of 27th of March where, we're not classified as an essential service. A very, very dark period. We did not know how long we'd be in. We had no clue as to when we can resume operations. And we were getting new data points all the time. The world literally stopped. 90% of the global airlines stopped flying, as an example. Something that's never been seen before. And we had to find a way. And one of the things that we did as a sector was to get together and say, let's craft a recovery plan. Let's look through this pandemic and actually start to saying, how are we going to look like on the other side of it? What do we need to put in place and get South Africa back then on the world circuit in terms of tourism?
The WHO says we must be prepared for another pandemic. What would you like to see next time round? I know it might be far in the future. We might never get rid of COVID-19. Would you want more subsidies from government? How else could this have been played?
Well, we are where we're at as an economy and as a country in terms of the fiscus really been empty, as it were. The most sustainable way of actually helping any sector is allowing it to trade. So we've got to trade our way through out of it, as opposed to getting subsidies that are just not sustainable. Now, the issue then is that how do we get into an environment where the sectors are able to trade within a space that is also not adding any more risk in terms of pandemic to the country? And that's the tight balance we've got to find.
When it comes to trade, I mean, people say we should trade in rhino, horn. I know that international travellers obviously have stopped been coming here, those who want to shoot wildlife for their own consumption. Do those sort of conversations play an important factor now going forward? Because it's obviously got to be a holistic approach to our recovery.
Absolutely. We've got to be careful of taking short-term solutions for long-term problems.
Yeah.
And whilst it may give some sort of relief in the short term, the consequences may be bigger in the longer term. You know, as South African tourism, we jealously guard the tourism reputation of the country, because that goes into the mix where consumers, consider the country or not. And our reputation's really got to be up there. Issues around sustainability are far exceeding elements of pricing or experience. So we want to make sure that in the mind of the consumer, those that are thinking about coming to South Africa, that it's placed up there as a space that actually leads in wildlife conservation. And we have found the relationship that is actually amenable between humans and actually wildlife as well.
It's obviously not over yet. Our borders are closed. There are many companies, many outfits that only appeal to the international traveller, that take the pounds and the dollars. South Africans, possibly the majority, cannot afford them. What needs to happen to them?
Well, we all have to press the reset button. We all have to pivot, as it were. This is the new reality. It is what it is. All economies, including South Africa, have to take care of themselves in the short term, whilst we're actually looking at how, opening up of borders looks like. Both from the consumer side, I like to look at not price, but the value proposition, right? So previously, as an example, if you were a lodge and you offered 3-course meals 4 times a day, as an example, we may want to kind of amend that for the local side. And I know it sounds easier said than done, but that's the reality that you have. It's adjusting to the economic trends and times of where we find ourselves in.
Cesar, I really appreciate you coming in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.